Hello and welcome to the Draft Digital Spotlight. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, but you can call me Mark2 Digital, and I am honored to have with me in the virtual studio today, Sacha Black, the Rebel author. Sacha, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the D2D Spotlight.
Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor. I have been watching some of these and loving them. So I'm really honored to be here.
I guess I was jumping the gun because we are going to be releasing the audio of these in a podcast, and I just kind of let the cat out of the bag there if we haven't already on this. But I'm so excited to have you here with me today because just a few days ago you were celebrating a very special anniversary. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It was my 1 year anniversary of having walked out of my day job. So I have been fully self-employed for an entire year. So yeah, it felt like a special one.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. So you didn't just go from full-time work to full-time writing. I love the plan that you put into place. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it was probably, I would say, at least 5 solid years of knowing that this was going to happen. Maybe a little bit more subconsciously percolating, but 5 years before I left, I decided that I wanted to do this full time. So I started writing, I started learning, I started consuming podcasts any way that I could get information to learn about the industry, about marketing, about publishing, about the craft. And then a couple of years before I left, I then started reducing my hours. And I forget the exact metrics, but by the time I actually left, I thought I was going to leave this year. So I dropped to about 75% full time when I left, but I was intending to drop to half time. But it just so happened that I got some long-term freelance work that came in that just bridged that gap between what I was already generating myself and what I needed just to cover and a little bit more of my bills. So yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. But you had a plan. You had let's speak in writer terms. You had an outline, right, of all the steps that you were going to make for writing this novel, and then something happened along the way. There was a little bit of a plot twist, which it was a positive plot twist.
That's absolutely right. I love that you described it like that. Yes, there was a massive plot twist, and yeah, so I left an entire year early, and that was one of the funny things when I was writing my sort of annual summary, was the surprise that actually I was sitting there writing this post when actually I thought that this was the time I was going to be leaving. So it was a blessing to be able to leave a year early.
Well, happy anniversary. I should have brought a little cake with a little candle or something and have you virtually blow it out. We could have faked that whole thing.
Yeah.
Social safe celebration. So you talked about the things you learned in terms of you spent some time, like, several years in advance learning stuff. Where were you picking up the information from?
Yeah, so wonderful mentors like yourself for a start, and also people like Joanna Penn, Mark Dawson. So I would listen to podcasts at work whenever I possibly could. I became that really antisocial work person who would just get to work, shove headphones in, and then not talk to anybody for the whole 8 hours. So any time I possibly could, I would be consuming audio when I was doing things like emails that didn't really require my brain to be focused. If I was writing reports, then obviously I couldn't, but so yes, podcasts were a big one. I took courses as well. So I'm trying to think whose I took, but I took courses on marketing, so different social media courses. I took Mark Dawson's self-publishing courses. I also read books, so I've read some of your books on libraries and Kobo as well, and lots of other different non-fiction books. I read lots of Joanna Penn's books, and then also wonderful organizations like Ally. They have an amazing forum where lots of people ask questions, and they also run a conference twice a year, so consuming content through conferences as well, and then also in-person conferences too. So I'm yet to come over the pond, but I'm hoping next year is the year. fingers crossed for Corona Gate to end. I will be coming to America next year.
Awesome.
But yeah, so also conferences in the UK. So there are a couple of the 20 Books conferences I've been to, and then the London Book Fair and things. And then just talking and networking and being in the community. And, you know, there is so much you can learn from just watching things like this and being present in Facebook groups and communicating to writers.
Okay, excellent. So you talked about Ally, and that's how we met, because you were very involved and are still very involved in. How important is an organization or writers group or any of those things, even if you can't physically be traveling right now?
I think it's so important because Ally, I mean, I am obviously biased. Admittedly, I'll put my hands up and admit that I am wildly biased about Ally. But it creates a safe space, I think. You are with like-minded people in the forums, and they're the places where you don't feel like an idiot if you want to ask what you may feel is a stupid question, but isn't actually, because I don't really believe in stupid questions. So that's the first reason. The second reason is particularly organizations like Ally champion and they lobby government, and they submit white papers to governments on our behalf. So things like, you know, taxes, for example. I know that Orna particularly has lobbied on subjects like the UK VAT that just came off on books. So organizations like that, I think, are super important, not just for the connections that you're able to make in the groups, but also for the grander scheme work that they do. And then also they have other benefits like discounts and things that they do, and everybody loves a bargain. So yeah.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about your writing. So you are a fiction author.
Mm-hmm.
And you also have nonfiction books specifically for writers. What came first?
That's a really hard question because technically the fiction came first,
Okay.
but I actually ended up publishing nonfiction first. So I had written fiction, lots and lots and lots of fiction, but it just so happened that I ended up publishing nonfiction first, just because I had been sharing some of my lessons that I had learned on my journey online, and one particular one about villains just hit as some kind of zeitgeist, and I got a ton of traffic and a ton of comments and a ton of people asking questions, and I realized there must be a huge gap in the market, and so I just diverted what I was doing, and yeah, so I published the nonfiction about how to create better villains first, and then I diverted and started publishing the fiction. But so that, yeah, that's the order.
Well, I was gonna actually ask what came first, the hero or the villain, but I think the villain did come first. Is that correct?
It did, yeah. Also because that speaks to my devilish, like, you know, black heart, I should say. But you know.
Well, let's talk about villains, because we've had a lot of really great conversations about what makes a great villain, and you've got this for writers, right? The 13 Steps to Evil is the name of the book.
That's right. Yeah.
Excellent. So. Why villains? Why was that the first thing that you addressed before you even got to heroes?
Well, for a start, I think villains are woefully neglected in the majority of stories. We are very hero-centric. You know, the hero is narrating the story. So obviously everybody thinks the hero is the most important character. But I beg to differ. The villain is the character or the thing in your story that generates conflict. Every story is about change. It's about the emotional arc of the story of your protagonist. You don't have change unless there is some kind of driving force to force change, and that driving force is your villain. And so most writers, when they are creating their stories, focused entirely on the hero and then don't put enough importance, they don't put enough depth into their villain. And so you often get these characters who they'll just be evil for the sake of evil rather than having some kind of motive behind it and a justification and a reason why. And so it just makes stories weak. Obviously, you can get away with it because lots of people do, but you shouldn't because it's bad.
Bad villain writer.
Yeah.
So what are there certain villains that stand out in your mind as exemplary of particular traits that are important for them to have?
Yeah, so I always get asked, which villain do you like best? And I'm like, that's like asking me which child I like best. Like, you can't ask that. But what I do is I tend to favor elements of
Okay.
villains. So I don't know if you've seen The Matrix, spoiler alert, but Agent Smith is the villain, and he has this amazing crazy, is what I like to call it. So his ethos, his driving force is that he believes that humanity is a plague. We are a virus on the earth. And he has this fantastic monologue that made me believe that humans were a virus. So he is an exemplary example of a fantastic villain monologue that will, just for a split second, make you believe in what he's saying. Then you've got people like Hannibal Lecter. Oh, what a fantastic juxtaposition of amazing charm in a complete psychopath, so I love the interplay of that and how that makes you feel as a reader or a watcher if you're watching the film. And so he's a wonderful example of how you can have positive traits in somebody who is inherently evil.
Right.
What else? I love anti-heroes. Any anti-hero has my heart typically, because they do the things that we secretly want to and can't do because it's illegal. And so Beetlejuice, Deadpool, Maleficent is a kids one recently. So I love also most anti-heroes because they're doing naughty things, generally being cheeky with it, whilst still making the right decision in the end, even if it's for the wrong reason, which they typically do. But
Oh, that is awesome. I love listening to you talk about the great traits. But no, because it does make for interesting conflict. It makes for a lot more three-dimensionality. One of the things that struck me about Hannibal Lecter was he was just so ultimately sophisticated. And I mean, even the second book in the series, where you actually get more into his head and understand a little bit about why he became a cannibal. Pretty amazing. So if I mention a villain like The Simpsons Sideshow Bob, right? Someone who's got that sophistication, with Kelsey Grammer doing the voice.
So this is the thing. You need to make your villains unbeatable, and sometimes that is through intellect. Sometimes it's through skill. But some of the best villains are villains who appear completely unbeatable, because that is the ultimate obstacle for a hero. So I completely understand why you're saying Sideshow Bob and Hannibal in that way, because actually they are, I nearly said a bad word then, they are terrifying because they are so clever. You're like, how on earth is the hero going to defeat them? Because it just, they are always 3 steps ahead. And so, yes, absolutely, that is a marker of a very, very good villain. Is they don't have to be super intelligent, but when they have some kind of skill or weaponry or whatever that makes them appear utterly unbeatable.
Right. Like, and yesterday was Star Wars Day, so obviously I'm going to gravitate towards Darth Vader as an iconic villain that most people, even if they don't know Star Wars, would recognize. Absolutely. But I think there's something also redeemable in a villain too, right?
Yeah. Well, there doesn't have to be, but usually there should be. So villains, the best kind of villain is a villain who will appear in some way human. So there is the very famous phrase that even a villain has a mummy. And the point is that if you can make your villain appear to have some kind of humanity still, then they become slightly more relatable. And then in that respect, your reader or watcher will then connect with and understand your villain slightly more. So giving your villain, there's a couple of ways you can do, well, there's a million ways you can do it, but here's 2. You can give your villain a wound, for example, something in their past, just like your hero has a flaw. Why not give your villain one? Something that from their past is, and the important thing when you do this is to make sure it's relevant to the plot and connected. So it must be driving their why behind what they're doing, why they are being evil in your story. And the second thing you can do is to give them something either to love, to care about, or a bit of a cliche, but a pet, for example, or a person that they love, even a henchman that they're kinder to than other people. but something that enables them to show some level of humanness, kindness, mercy, for example. Obviously, they mostly need to be bad, but just the occasional little breadcrumb of something nice will be enough to really give your villain depth.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So let's get to, you have a book about heroes. What is it called?
10 Steps to Hero, How to Craft a Kick-Ass Protagonist.
Oh, excellent. And so on the flip side of that, then, to the villain, is what are some of the errors, the common errors that writers make when they write heroes?
So I think the biggest one is they make them perfect. It drives me nuts when I read a book about a perfect hero. Nobody likes perfect Peter. Like, they're actually really annoying because heroes and protagonists are supposed to, your reader wants to see elements of themselves in a hero. And as much as we like to think we're perfect, we're not. So the best thing to do is to create a hero who also isn't perfect. And that's not necessarily just through them having a flaw. It can also be them making mistakes or making the right decision, but for the wrong reason. All of these things give your hero that little extra layer of depth. So I would say that's probably the biggest mistake.
Awesome. Thank you. And so we move from villains to heroes to, and you just released the third book in your trilogy of books for writers. What was that?
So it's coming. So it's on the 29th of May.
But it's still on its way.
It's on pre-order. It's on pre-order.
So it is on pre-order every month.
Yeah, it is. It is in ebook, paperback, and hardbook. Audiobook once I've moved house and built my audio booth. But yes, The Anatomy of Prose: 12 Steps to Sensational Sentences.
Ooh, a little bit of alliteration there too. That's pretty exciting.
A little bit. Yeah.
So why you went with characters first, then you moved into the actual structure of the writing. What drove you in that direction?
I think a couple of reasons. One, I am a super word nerd. I absolutely adore breaking down any book that I read. I will take a pencil, I know it's sacrilege, but don't hate me, and mark down sentences that stick out, or dialogue that sticks out, or whatever, something that sticks out. I'm going to mark it down, and then I go back to it once I've finished the book and I analyze the patterns. So what have I mostly marked dialogue? Have I mostly marked description? Have I mostly marked foreshadowing? And then when I found whatever it is that this particular author is good at, I then deconstruct it and see what I can learn from the patterns of the way they have constructed it. So that was the first thing. I wanted to share my obsessive love of sentence geekery. And then the second reason is because I have spent quite a long time doing developmental editing and noticing very similar mistakes, well, not mistakes, but just ways that people can improve their prose. But the problem with editing is that's a one-on-one relationship. I can only help one person at a time. And so I wanted to create something that would be like a sentence Bible for writers to be able to use as a reference guide to like read through, go back, flick to, in order to be able to improve their prose. And by creating a book, you can help many. It's a one-to-many relationship. So those, I think, are the two reasons that I created it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That is awesome. So 3 great books, 2 out already, 1 out at the end of May 2020. So how do you decide what to work on in terms of your writing? Is for, nonfiction to help other writers, or fiction? What kind of decides that for you?
That is a very good question. I would like to say that I work on one thing at a time, but that doesn't seem to have been the pattern. And it's not necessarily a good way of doing it. So I think it's mostly flights of whimsy and fancy, but I typically work on one and then you go back. So if I've worked on nonfiction, I'll then jump to fiction just because it's a palette cleaner. I get very tired, I would say, mentally, because I literally put everything I possibly can into each book that I write. So if I've, focused heavily on nonfiction for 3 months, then I really have to go back and write fiction. So yes, I would say I try to do one than the other, but I got 75,000 words through my fiction book and hit a really significantly large brick wall and was just jumped ship and wrote The Anatomy of Prose. But I have to now go back and finish that very hard book.
Wrote an entire book, and then I'll come back to it.
Yeah, basically.
Not just an afternoon where you binge watch something on Netflix. You go and write another book.
Oh.
Cool. Well, I have to pop this up. This is a comment from Maddie Williams, who says, as always, Sacha is an amazing help. I couldn't agree more. I actually feel smarter every time I talk to you, and I've learned something more about writing just by so I just want to remind people that we'll be taking questions in about 10 minutes, but I want to get into your podcast because that is something that I learn from every week. The Rebel Author Podcast. First of all, where did Rebel Author come from? Where did that name come from?
So I actually come from a family of black sheep. So funnily enough, I interviewed my dad last night for my podcast, and he was saying we come from a family of black sheep. And I was like, you know what? We really do. I have a picture of my great grandmother holding a Tommy gun in the middle, a real one in the middle of a hotel. Like, I think it's just in my blood. Like, I just think that everybody in my family is a black sheep. And so that is one of the reasons I just constantly, the best way to get me to do something is to tell me not to do it. And unfortunately, my son has inherited that, and karma is awful. So that's one of the reasons. And the second reason is that it's just one of my values. So I have 3 values that I try to adhere to. The first one is to be really motivational for other people. The second one is to be knowledgeable. And the third one is to be a little bit rebellious. It's something that it's part of me. I like to share it because creativity is, born in rebellion by breaking the rules and going outside the box. So yeah, it's just who I am.
That is awesome. And how long has the podcast been out for?
I think I started it at the last week of September last year. So 6 months-ish. 6 months.
Okay. And then about how many episodes are...
I am just about to do episode 30 this week. So it's been out 6 months, but I've done a couple of bonus, like, solo episodes. So this last week I did a solo episode on the lessons that I've learned since I left my day job. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want you to share with listeners the format of the podcast, because you have like an audience engagement element that I find just really inspiring and fun.
I do. So I start with an intro. I just give an update, always recommend a book. And then I ask for a listener rebel of the week. So I try, and sometimes I get nervous that I won't be able to fill the spot, but quite often I'll have a backlog. So I get listeners to send me little rebellions, or big rebellions, or middle rebellions. It doesn't matter, as long as it's some kind of rebellion. And I've had all kinds of stories from parents buying their son a doll just because, why do we have to have gender norms, all the way through to complete and outright disrespect to bosses at work because they've been awful to somebody, through to all kinds of things. So listener rebels will be spoken about each week. And then I do the interview where I try to get to the root of whatever it is that person's come on to talk about. Like, what are the root lessons that they've learned? What mistakes have they learned from, or do they see other people making in their expertise area? And then, what are the positive things they've learned? And then I always ask my guests for a rebellion story, because it's a writing podcast. It's a creative podcast. So tell me a story. Tell me a story about a rebellion. So I like to end with a rebel story as well.
Oh, that's always fun. Are there some favorites that you're willing to share? Family safe, of course.
What rebel stories? No, because I've gone completely blank. So I mentioned that I interviewed my dad last night.
Yes,
and
yeah.
yeah, I have to say I am a little bit biased, but I think his rebel story is just outrageous, and it's what happened the day of my birth.
Oh.
And so that episode will be coming in June, about the middle of June. But he tells a story of what happened. He was a very naughty boy on the day of my birth, and basically ended up in a jail cell. And then I saved him, but I will leave the rest of that story for the podcast. Also, because he turned me into a hero, and so Dad,
that's
ruining my reputation.
Excellent cliffhanger. Excellent advice for writing. In the example you set is leave them wanting more.
Exactly.
Excellent. I love that. So is it safe to say that potentially when you write your life story that it might be called Born Under a Rebel Moon or something like that?
It may well be, yeah.
Excellent. Are you have you gone back to that novel that you put aside? Did you get over the hurdle?
So I have realized a pattern with myself, and it's that I never know how a story will begin until I'm about 75% of the way through the story. So I don't write chronologically. I really wish I did, but I don't. I write in spits and spats and scenes, and sometimes I'm at the end, and sometimes I'm at the beginning, and sometimes I'm who knows where. But I always try and write to the beginning. So I try to write the end and then the beginning, and it always changes. And 9 times out of 10, when I have got that beginning wrong, it messes me up. I can't then get to the end of the book because something's wrong at the beginning. And so I hit this barrier, and I don't know how to fix it until I work out what the beginning is. I have worked out the beginning, so I think I can go back and finish it. I've only got about 15K left to write. So yeah, it shouldn't take me too long, but I'm about to move house. So but yeah, so I am digging it out this week. Literally, it's on my to-do list this week. So yes, I will go back to it.
So what comes first when you're writing fiction? I was speaking specifically about fiction. What comes first? Is it a scene? Is it dialogue? Is it a character? Is it a situation? Or does it change?
Yeah, it does. It does. I'm going to sound like a hippie, but I don't care. It's what I think. I think stories are genuinely sentient. They come from somewhere else, much like in the way that Elizabeth Gilbert talks about, the muse being separate to you. I walked past a lamppost and a story dropped into my head. Like, I cannot explain to you how that happened, but 2 very clear characters came to me, and I would say 60% of the plot came to me. Literally, I walked past a lamppost and the story dropped into my head. That lamppost features in the story, I have to say, also. But anyway, and then other times so the very first book I published, the character came to me when I was 9 years old, sat in a cupboard crying because of bullies, and that character stayed with me for like 21 years before I wrote the book. So it can be anything. I'm quite a visual person, so I do like creating mood boards, whether they're digital or physical, and very much going and visiting. So I travel a lot. I climb into derelict buildings quite a lot to take pictures. I told you I was a rebel. That's not always legal either. And oh, what am I admitting?
We won't send this to the authorities. They're not watching. But I mean, that's research, right? It's just all well-grounded research for.
Exactly. And so I do things like in London, they have these tours of derelict train stations. So I try to find unusual things. Like I go and visit. I think it's the John Sloan or the Wellcome Collection. Anyway, like collections of things around death, or surgeons. I can't think what they're called, like these surgeon museums and stuff. Anything that's weird and unusual, I'm like, yeah, gimme, because it's all story fodder, and it must percolate, and somehow it comes out again. Everything you put in comes back out. So yeah, there is no one way a story will come to me. Yeah.
Well, cool. That's great. Thank you. I'm going to start taking some of the questions. So we kind of got into this a little bit. I want to dig a little bit further though. So Alyssa asks, if you don't write chronologically, where do you start?
So before I start, I know the ending.
You always do.
Always. I won't start unless I know the ending, because the ending is a map. It essentially gives you a fixed point where you know where you're going. Usually I will write some of the ending, very loose. It might not be a completed ending. It might just be a scene, a fight scene. It might be part of the climax. It might be the epilogue. But it will be, usually I would say, that's where I start. And then I write whatever is clearest to me. So I'm one of these writers that will see a movie scene in their head and I just transcribe what I see. So I will go to whichever scene is calling the loudest, or is the clearest movie in my head. And then I will make my way through those. What tends to happen is that I'll do a few of those, and then they connect together. So then I have a large chunk of maybe 10,000 words or 20,000 words. And then I'll go somewhere else and I'll puzzle piece them together as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Thank you. I'm going to move in a different direction with the next question. This one is coming from Lexi, and Lexi asks, what is one thing that people are prone to doing or expect they have to do that you think is important to rebel from? It could be as a person or as a writer.
So I think as a person, it's follow the rules. You do not unless it's legal things. I'm not going to advocate breaking the law, but
or climbing into buildings.
Well, I just think, that you don't have to follow the rules, and the people who come up with the most interesting ideas, the best solutions to problems, are usually those who break the rules or think outside the box. The literal action of thinking outside the box is being a rebel, so anybody, don't think that you have to follow the rules. If your boss tells you you have to do a job in a particular way and you can see a way to do it quicker, that's more effective and more efficient, do it, and then show them how effective and efficient you have been, because the only way to show people who like the rules that you can break the rules and it's okay is by breaking the rules and apologizing afterwards. But in terms of writing, I would say probably people thinking they have to write in a certain way. It might be because you think that that's what a writer's voice sounds like, or you think that that's what you have to deliver in your genre. And yes, to a certain extent, it's good to hit some tropes, but you don't always have to hit every single trope, and you don't have to write overly descriptive prose or overly clinically clean prose. The joy of writing is about finding your voice and finding whatever values you have inside. So take, for example, I'm a bit of a rebel, I like to be knowledgeable and motivational. Those three elements literally describe my nonfiction books. I swear in them. It's breaking the rules. It's probably frowned a lot. I don't care, so it's people thinking that you have to write in a certain way, or that craft books about writing craft have to be, structured and boring, essentially. They don't. You can learn and have a laugh. So yes.
Awesome. Just popping up a comment from my writerly, my favorite rebel author. So excited to get to hear Sacha's insight.
Oh, thank you.
The next question is from Renee, and Renee says, I learn best through example. Can you recommend a hero that makes the right choice for the wrong reason?
That's putting me on the spot. I am sure I can. I'm just struggling. Thor, for example. Thor.
Okay.
Yeah, Thor in the Thor. I'm sorry, it's a movie because that's the first thing that came to me. Under pressure. But Thor in the movies makes, and I can't remember what he does, but I know for a fact he makes the wrong decision, and that's why he loses his hammer, and he has to then go and prove that he is going to be a good leader and think about other people. And it's only then when he realizes he has to think of others first, that he then starts making the right decisions for the right reasons. He is, before that, he is saving Asgard, but because he's arrogant and he wants the honor and he's going to be king. So he's he is saving people and saving the Asgardians, but for the wrong reason, because he's an arrogant schmuck and, he wants the glory. So that's not the best example, but pressure.
Hey, on the spot, a little bit of David Bowie, a little bit of Queen there. You came together under pressure and you pulled out something pretty awesome. So.
Thanks.
Now, this is the next question is more of a technical question related to your future plans for publishing. So will all your books become audiobooks, or just the Anatomy of Prose? What's the plan for your audiobooks?
Definitely my non-fiction textbooks. So 13 Steps to Evil, 10 Steps to Hero, and The Anatomy of Prose will definitely be audiobooks. The workbooks will not. At the moment, I have been asked if I'll do the workbooks in audio, but I just don't think they'll listen very well. Right. And then in terms of my fiction, I'm not sure. I'm going to be narrating my non-fiction, and I feel far more comfortable narrating those than I do necessarily the fiction. So I'm not sure. Never say never. I may take some refresher lessons or something, but I'm not sure on the fiction. But definitely the non-fiction, yes.
Oh, I look forward to that, because I do enjoy the Rebel Author podcast. I think you've got a natural voice for that, and I would rather hear your books in your voice than in someone else's. Like,
Thank you.
The one in my head, the one that you say is much better.
Thank you. I think it makes sense when it's that first person narrative non-fiction. It makes sense to record them.
Yeah, that does make sense. So I look forward to that as well. So next, just have to, Renee says, you sound like my daughter. She always says it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Oh yeah, that's my mentor.
Exactly.
iWriterly says, what's one of the biggest mistakes you see writers make when it comes to prose, and how did you address that, or how did you provide tips for that in your forthcoming book, The Anatomy of Prose?
So I'll answer the second part of that question first, which seems backwards, but the way that I always teach is to explain what the issue is, to explain why it's an issue, because I think if somebody doesn't understand why something's a problem, it's not absorbable. Just like your villain needs a why and your hero needs a why too. And then I provide examples. So I like to have non-fiction lessons taught to me with examples, so I can see it in practice. I can see the mistakes, and then I can see the correction. And I try to do that throughout all of my books. In terms of a mistake, there are lots, but a couple that spring to mind are filtering. It's one of the quickest fixes you can do. So when you filter, you, the author, remove the reader one step from the protagonist. So filter words include things like I heard, I saw, I felt, I thought. None of those words need to be in your sentences, because instead of the reader seeing through your protagonist's eyes, your reader is then watching your protagonist interact in the scene. So, for example, a filtered sentence would be, I heard the owl hoot in the trees. A non-filtered sentence, so a better sentence, would be, the owl hooted in the trees. That makes it more immediate. It makes the reader hear the sound through the protagonist's ears rather than watching the protagonist hear the sound. I hope that makes sense. Like, I know I said it quite quickly, but hopefully that makes sense. And then the other one is a lack of anchoring in your scenes. So what tends to happen when writers vomit information down, because I mean, I do it. I vomit my scenes. Like, it's just what happens. We typically forget to anchor our scenes. So every beginning of your scene needs to be anchored in time, space, and point of view. So the reason for this is because when you don't know when a reader is going to put your book down, they might put it down in the middle of a scene, they might put it down at the end of a chapter. You just don't know. So when you change scene, because typically people will read to the end of a whole point, which is a scene break, you need to make sure that when you start that new scene, you identify very quickly in the first paragraph who it is that is either narrating or speaking, when it is. So if you've had a passage of time between scenes, they need to know, because it's in your head, it's not going to be in the reader's head. And also physically where they are located. And those are probably the two biggest ones, apart from things like wordiness in sentences. But yeah.
Oh, that is cool. That is so cool. This is a great lesson. I can't wait to dig into that book. So what's one of the things that when you talked about a few years ago when you wanted to strike out full time as a writer, what's one of the things you would want to tell Sacha from 3, 4, 5 years ago, that she wasn't expecting, that she's like, I need to prepare, besides COVID-19, to prepare her for what's coming?
That's a really interesting question. I'm trying to think about the lessons that I've learned this year. Part of it is really personal, and so I suffer really badly with imposter syndrome and doubt. And look, I know every writer suffers with these things, but I get genuine anxiety over these things, and so. No matter, I have always done this, and I will always do this. But whenever I'm afraid of something, I have to force myself to do it. I will absolutely make myself do it. And so I think I would tell earlier me to do those things sooner. Like, for example, today, perfect example, it's a year ago, I had a consultancy session with somebody who's very well known, and they basically told me to create courses because I have nonfiction books. It has taken me a year to pluck up the courage to actually start creating my courses. Like, it's so frustrating. Like, I should have done this a year ago. I know that, but I was afraid. I had imposter syndrome. It was doubt. And so I would tell younger me to just do the thing, Sacha, do the thing. Like, you're going to do it anyway. Just do it now. Don't wait. Or, yeah. So I think that is probably what I would say to younger me.
I'm gonna take the flip side stance and caution you that maybe Sacha wasn't ready for this. Maybe there was something that she needed to learn along the way. So let's talk about you in the third person.
Yeah.
Something that you needed to learn along the way. Is it maybe it came at the right time? Maybe now you're actually ready to do that because of some other experiences you've had?
Perhaps. I think maybe part of it was that, but I definitely think I could have done it at least 6 months ago, and I didn't. And that was for no other reason than, how that they say, and this is particularly for women will say, oh, I can't possibly do that because I need more education, or I need to do some training, or I need to whatever. Well, I took a course on how to do courses. I knew how to do courses, it's ridiculous. So I do think, I am in a different position now. I do know much more, but I definitely think I should have done more sooner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there then, to kind of follow that along, is there such a thing as, for pros or for doing something that you set out as a goal, is there such a thing as too much over preparation?
Yes, I think that is also symptomatic of me and writing books, because I would say I've got my nonfiction process down now, but I will consume books and information and knowledge before I start writing, and I'm okay with that because I like to have very thoroughly researched books. But I definitely think I use that as a procrastination tool with fiction, because fear and, or what if I don't know this, and oh well, I don't want to overwrite and have to then cut words out. It's just an excuse. Just write the book, So yes, I definitely think I have a tendency to then over plan or wait, and there's no need to. So yeah, just dive in, just do it.
Excellent. Oh, this is fantastic. So let's let people know where they can find out more about you, so they can check out your books as well as check out your amazing podcast as well.
So sachablack.co.uk, that is Sacha with a C and not an S. And then my podcast is the Rebel Author Podcast. And I've also just started a second podcast called Next Level Authors.
Next Level Authors, when's that coming out?
Oh, so it's out. I think we've got 4 or 5 episodes. And so I co-host that one with Daniel Wilcox. And it's about next level authors. So the whole purpose of it is to take us to the next business level or the next career level. Right. And each week we take one topic, one subject, and ask each other about it. And then we set accountability publicly. So we have to do one task a week. And if we don't, there are consequences. So yes, so that's the 2 podcasts. And I have a Facebook group also, which is Rebel Authors, and my Instagram is Sacha Black Author, which is where I'm most active. That's the one I'm most active on.
Excellent. Well, as I said, I feel so much smarter, so much more knowledgeable about writing and prose and so many things. I feel a little bit more like a rebel as well, having spent some more time with you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights and humor with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It has been both a pleasure and an honor.